This is the final session of the afternoon, and it is entitled Beyond Florence Cathedral. And here we are certainly beyond Florence Cathedral, so that seems appropriate. Our first speaker is Lauren Jacobi, thank you, who joined the MIT faculty in 2013. Her research and teaching interests concentrate on the history of late medieval through pre-industrial Italian architecture and urbanism, with an emphasis on connections across the Mediterranean world. Prior to being at MIT, Lauren was visiting lecturer in the Department of Art History at Dartmouth. She has also taught at New York University, where she completed her doctoral work in 2012. She's the author of publications on topics ranging from the topographic location of international and local banks in Rome to the medallic representations of Pope Paul V's architectural projects. She's currently working on a book project in which she studies the topography of money in Renaissance Italy. Her research has received support from the Crest Foundation, American Council of Learned Societies, and American Numismatic Society, Morgan Library, and Museum, among other institutions. Morgan and Stanley, no. That would be likely. And she is speaking to us about that necessary evil in all things, and in a particular way in the making of art, which is money. The title of her talk is Fluidity and Fecundity, Metal, Money, and the Florentine Zecca.
So thank you for that introduction. Before I begin my paper, I'd like to express my sincere thanks to the show's curators as well as MOBIA staff for organizing today's events. In 1996, conservators at the Opificio della Pietra Dura in Florence set about cleaning the reverse sides of Ghiberti's Gates of Paradise. As they worked to remove stains of age, abject layers of dirt and wax, to their surprise, they found 40 small images had been punched into the bronze surface of the right door. Among these beguiling marks were a beaded circle, groups of dolphins from the stem of a member of the Pazzi family, as well as the stem itself, and fragments of the body of Florence's patron saint, John the Baptist. As other scholars have demonstrated so insightfully, these impressions were made from iron dies used to stamp the obverse and reverse sides of the celebrated Florentine florin, as well as denominations of silver coins. It seems the dies were being used to test changes, however slight, to the well-established iconographic program used on Florentine currency. These marks date from the first half of 1448 and 1449, when the position of a head die engraver was in the midst of a perhaps uneasy transition from Michelozzo di Bartolomeo to Bartolomeo Cennini. Michelozzo and Cennini, or just Cennini himself, retooling Michelozzo's irons, engraved the dies used to make the impressions. And what we are seeing is perhaps, although not necessarily, their handiwork. These captivating marks, tactically pounded, I will argue, into one of Florence's most celebrated artworks, presses against a narrowly hermetic understanding of sculpture, inviting us to acknowledge coins as plastic art. We are also reminded of the incredible range of shifts of scale and material that figures like Michelozzo routinely worked in as they moved from engraving dies and shaping metal to other artistic practices such as carving tombs and designing buildings. With the migratory mint practices witnessed on the Gates of Paradise in mind, and to which I will return at the end of my paper, I will use today's symposium as an opportunity to scrutinize ways that bullion was manipulated as it was deployed in late medieval and Renaissance Florence and beyond, both as money but also as matter constituted specifically not to be monetary currency. This paper has a twofold argument. First, that the protean status of the metal that was brought to the mint, and which was typically melted, refined, and then struck into currency, as well as the mint itself, were important cognates for the vibrancy of the Florentine Republican communal economy. I then discuss gold leaf, which I assert carried significant meaning in its very matter, as coins were transformed into thin discs and sheets of metal and then applied to help constitute various objects. It is important here to state that my second interest aligns with a growing body of research that sees physical material as bearing its history, which is to say that matter can carry its own data as it moves spatially, sometimes across very large distances and also as it's transformed physically. Gold leaf, in this case, was embedded with its generic origination history, alongside its legacy as coinage, both of which attested to the potency of trade. As historians know well, the late medieval Florentine economy transitioned from a silver coinage that was both the unit of account and the medium of exchange to a bimetallic monetary system in the middle of the 13th century. Around 1230, Florence began to mint its own money. In 1252, the Florentines leveraged a decline in the relative value of gold to silver to produce that well-known, ever-stable mechanism of medieval and Renaissance trade, the gold florin. During the late medieval and Renaissance era, the variability of metallic content in coins, that is to say, liquidity, was the characteristic of metal that brought it to the mint to be coined. By and large, once it was in the local domain, metal came into the mint by way of a process called free minting. Free minting was not literally free, but freely available for a seigniorage charge to those who wanted to convert the metal they possessed into coinage, albeit for a price. Currency at the mint was produced for private individuals or sometimes corporations of bankers who could be foreigners. They would bring in old coins, raw material, or metallic objects, be issued a credit, and then return a few days or weeks later, if necessary, to receive the number of coins credited. The volume of coins produced depended on individuals to determine when to melt or hoard coins to use liquidity to their financial advantage. Metal transformed into change, into money, was made through a joint, highly civic political act in which several operatives were involved, including persons bringing money to the mint and the state, which legitimized money by stamping a sign onto it. This dynamic illustrates Tim Ingold's insight that, quote, the artifact, in short, is the crystallization of activity within a relational field. When coins were manufactured at the Florentine Mint, they strongly iterated the political ideology of Republican Florence, where money-making was a matter of communality, in which physical money was owned privately but made in common. And one can say that's unlike our contemporary currencies where we don't actually own money. Although this transient system was marked at times by tensions within its dynamic, these stresses would reverberate through the system but not dramatically reshape it. In this sense, the Florentine Mint itself was an important spatial marker that visibly indicated the social dynamic of money-making, while also showcasing the Florentine civic ability to circulate money as a trade instrument. While the actual process of minting was not visible or generally accessible, the location of Florence's mint and its guild of money changers, the Arte del Cambio, were key to broadcasting the continued stability and communal power of Florentine coinage. Strikingly, the Arte del Cambio was the only one of Florence's guilds to locate its hall, its seat, on Piazza della Signoria, in close proximity to the Zecca. Most other major guilds built or rented meeting venues around the Church of San Michele. By 1373, the Florentines moved their mint to a building abutting the Loggia della Signoria to a site then called the Zecca Nuova. And I should point out here that the image that you're seeing on the right is from an 18th century plan. We don't actually know which rooms were used by the Zecca Nuova itself. It's possible that a problem with the infiltration of Pisan currencies into the Florentine monetary network catalyzed the mint's move to the Zecca Nuova, demonstrating the impact of the politics of coinage. During the 1350s, people stopped bringing silver to the Florentine mint because, among other reasons, the seigniorage charge was too high. By the early 1370s, silver Pisan coins, particularly the quattrino, had infiltrated Florentine territories because of their low metallic content. As a contemporary document attests, quote, much bad money is brought in very great quantity to the city of Florence. This influx of foreign money caused acute concern amongst the Florentines. In 1371, they set up a special commission to examine how to drive foreign coins out of Florentine territories. After much deliberation, a decision was made to debase the Florentine quattrino, meaning that demand for it would increase. The reduction in metal of a coin generally meant that speculators would flock to the mint to make money from a gap between the face value of a coin and the value of its metal content. The debasement of the quattrino caused the florin's value to rise suddenly between 1373 and 75, precisely when the mint first occupied the Zecca Nuova. The newly completed mint might have been seen as an overt symbol of the production of the quattrino and the rebounded strength of the florin. The establishment of the commission that investigated the invasion of foreign coins suggests that Florentines were very concerned about how money coming out of their mint was used and perceived, charging the mint building itself with representational force. The spatial position of the mint and the seat of the Money Changers Guild contributed to the investment of faith in the Florentine monetary system, importantly endowing an immaterial concept, money, with material trust. The insistence on asserting the viability of the florin was recursively iterated by the mint's assayers who checked the ratio of alloy to pure metal, thus controlling the fineness of a mint's coinage. Additionally, Florence's mint had a master goldsmith who was responsible for monitoring the room where newly coined florins were sealed in pouches. In 1346, it became illegal to stamp Florentine money with the image of St. John the Baptist outside of the Zecca, further assuring the quality of the mint's coins. The Comunes desired to gloss economic exchange as morally just, particularly in light of issues of usury, and fundamental to the interest of good government, buon governo, made the Piazza della Signoria and its buildings a locus of the legitimation of the production of government as an institution, or, in Foucault's terms, governmentality. With the rise of European monetization in the late 13th century, the distinction between the Christian sin of usury, lending money, and wealth accumulation became a highly fraught issue. Money was seen as a solvent, but equally as a potential instrument of imbalance, of chaos. Scholastics and others debated ways that legitimate profit could be earned. Though moral lines vary, generally the mendicant orders followed Aristotle's Nicomachean ethics and his politics, where Aristotle asserts that money is barren since, unlike organic things, it is not reproductive, hence the concept of the sterility of money. This posits currency within the so-called commodity theory of money, which sees money as an object whose value is determined by supply and demand, rather than a sign theory of money. It should be said that we've already seen ways in which Florentine money functioned as a sign. Nonetheless, so in Aristotelian terms, money should be a medium of exchange, a means of reciprocity, not a store of wealth that should be held for private gain. Within this schema, usurers violated nature by making money from money, a moral stance that conflated biological and economic fertility with economic uselessness. Moreover, when usurers hoarded, they took money out of circulation. Yet, if kept in circulation, the florin and other coin currency could be as potentially productive as usury was putatively sterile. In a sermon discussing, among other things, usury in Florence, the influential Franciscan missionary San Bernardino wrote, quote, "Evil is the concentration of money and wealth into one place. When wealth and money are concentrated in fewer and fewer hands and purses, it is a sign of the deteriorating state of the city." He continued, this is similar to when the natural warmth of the body abandons the extremities and concentrates only in the heart and the internal organs. This is seen as the clearest indication that life is slipping away and the person is soon to die. For wealth, it is not flowing back to the heart to give its assistance, but instead rushes to an abscess in a deadly hemorrhage. In this passage, Bernardino stressed a long-standing argument favoring the merits of the circulation of wealth, which proposed a type of social communal benefit provided by the perpetual movement of money. With these ideas about the morality of money in mind, I will turn to the use of gold as an artistic material in the remaining few minutes of this paper. In light of pressing concerns about usury, it is significant to note that gold coins were, in fact, taken out of circulation, overtly and usually, permanently so, to create gold leaf. A favored way to produce the substance was to pound and beat coins into thin sheets of foil. which were then adhered to surfaces and further worked. Coins were also pulverized or shaped into strands of thread composed of thinly twisted filaments of metal rather than fiber. One is tempted to wonder also about the material facture of sequins and other such objects. In the first quarter of the 15th century, there were at least 15 gold beaters in Florence, in the Florentine Arte di Por Santa Maria, whose statutes declared that gilding must be done with the purest of gold, further specifying that florin should be used as a base material, a recommendation previously supported by a practitioner theorist like Cennino Cennini, although Cennino actually advised using Venetian ducats. Several late medieval and Renaissance contracts confirm that gold used for gilding as gold leaf indeed should be aurum purum, or optimum aurum, pure gold, in other words, beaten and then usually applied to surfaces that were prepped. Having been created by the mint's skilled smelters and refiners and then inspected by assayers, coins assured their own materiality. Although there is a dearth of technical studies of the deployment of gold leaf on panels and other supports, analyses undertaken during the recent restoration of the Arena Chapel conjecture on technical grounds that metal used to adorn the chapel was derived from coins. The metal used for surface decoration of, among other things, cloaks, halos, armor, and for stars is both pure and was beaten to a consistent thickness, suggesting that gold leaf employed came from coins. Tests conducted at the Opificio on works including the Linaiuolo altarpiece by Fra Angelico, Lorenzo Monaco's Annunciation, Masaccio's St. Paul, now in Pisa, have revealed nearly pure gold content in the metal leaf used, indicating that the practice of beating coins to create fulgent picture planes and radiant surfaces was an active working method in Quattrocento Florence. Among the objects in sculpture in the age of Donatello that possibly reflect this tradition are the two heads created, in all likelihood, as the final components of Donatello's Cantoria. The heads were fashioned in an all'antica mode and set against purple porphyry underneath a projecting loft box. Some 17 years after the heads were added to the Cantoria ensemble, the opera paid gold beaters 20 lira, 8 soldi, for 600 pieces of ori fini to gild them. The right head still bears traces of its gilding, particularly in the area of the eyes and the beard, as you can see. While we cannot say with any certainty that the metal used to gild the heads came from coins, they remain a plausible material source. So, as I conclude, I'd like to return to the philosophical idea of the sterility of money, which would seem to render the use of coins as material ornamentation inert from an Aristotelian point of view. Unlike the mutation of metal into many other types of objects, hammered coins were more permanently removed from circulation, as gold leaf is difficult to melt. Gold, which is so often employed as a metaphor of transience, under these terms might be seen as static, which would arguably be morally problematic for patrons, including the mendicants who commission gilt and gold-ground works in such voluminous quantities. Yet framed as an indication of the potency of trade circulation, the matter used to make coins had deep valence as yardstick of economic fecundity and vibrancy. For late medieval and Renaissance patrons, commodities from distant places were entangled with the memory, however generic, of their origins as they moved geospatially. Some of the gold and silver that circulated in present-day Italy was derived from newly active mines in northern Europe. Gold, in particular, also came from West Africa, which had a long, albeit indirectly, provided gold to Italy through trade with the Maghreb, especially by way of Spain and Sicily. It's probable that Levantine trade was also an important source of material, although estimating quantities is extremely difficult. When gold leaf was applied to artworks or woven into textiles as threads, metal became an important cultural signifier of the long arm of trade, as well as a reminder that the mint was an important mechanism for orchestrating civic good through the circulation of commodities. Returning all too briefly to the marks hammered onto the gates of paradise, it is significant that the chief die engravers at the mint, or their designees, struck tests onto the verso of one of the most expensive civic commissions in Florence in the first half of the 15th century. It is unlikely that we will ever know why the irons left the heavily regulated confines of the mint, if in fact they did. However, what can be said is that their use on the door formed a dialogue between one of Florence's most important public commissions and coins. The test marks on the gates of paradise and coins transformed into gold leaf each directly apply money to an object, as a pressed sign in the former case and in a material sense in the latter. Both practices looped into a circuit that vested confidence in money, glossing that process as both morally just and an instrument to the well-being of the civic body. Thank you.
Our next speaker is one of the direct participants in the exhibition that's mounted upstairs, Amy Bloch, Assistant Professor of Art History at the University at Albany within the system of the State University of New York. Her research focuses on Italian Renaissance sculpture, and she's published articles and essays on Ghiberti, Donatello, Michelangelo, and on the art and ritual of baptism in Florence. She's been an Itati Fellow and had grants from the Renaissance Society of America College Art Association. Her book on Ghiberti's Gates of Paradise, forthcoming with the Cambridge University Press, is ardently awaited in Florence, particularly at the Opera del Duomo. Amy.
I've thought often in the last months in writing this paper that I've gone from working on some of the most beautifully preserved statues to some of the worst preserved statues, and I'll do my best to get them off the screen quickly. Even that is a contradiction, even though it's a contradiction. In his account of the 1401 competition for the Florence Baptistery's second set of bronze doors, Ghiberti claims that entrants came from all over the Italian peninsula to participate in the contest. The subsequent stage, what we might call the semifinals, was in fact a more local affair that included the Florentines Ghiberti, Brunelleschi, and Niccolo Lamberti, the little-known Simone from Colle di Valdelsa, a small town between Florence and Siena, and finally two prominent Sienese sculptors, Francesco di Valdambrino and Jacopo della Quercia, whose careers remained intertwined after this moment of contact. Entrants fashioned their reliefs in Florence, and art historians have emphasized the importance in particular of Jacopo della Quercia's Florentine experience, which came precisely in the years when the sculpted decorations for the cathedral highlighted in the exhibition upstairs were being planned and completed. Giulia Brunetti proposed that Jacopo actually became involved in these projects and before 1401, identifying him as author of several elements installed on the Porta della Mandorla, including the Annunciation group here on display. Many have disagreed with such attributions, but what cannot be disputed is the significance of Jacopo's time in Florence and the artistic relationships he established in 1401, when he probably met Donatello, who, like him, trained as a goldsmith and gravitated towards marble carving when young. No document records the nature of their earliest interaction, but the works they created in the early 15th century evince a constant flow back and forth of ideas and artistic formulae. Echoes of Jacopo's 1406 Silvestri Madonna, itself indebted to Arnolfo di Cambio's statue of Mary from the Florence Cathedral facade, reverberate in Donatello's monumental John the Evangelist, and the Evangelist, in turn, influenced Jacopo's approach to carving the seated Madonna in the lunette above the main portal of San Petronio in Bologna, where Mary's elongated torso and sloping legs recall the adjustments Donatello made to his John so it would cohere when viewed from below. And here you see them both from below as they were meant to be seen. After the competition, Jacopo left Florence and went first to Ferrara, where he carved the aforementioned Silvestri Madonna, and then to Lucca, where, with the assistance of Francesco di Valdambrino and others, he fashioned the tomb of Ilaria del Caretto. During a brief return to his native Siena in 1408, he signed a contract to fashion a new Fonte Gaia for the Campo, and in 1409 probably made the drawing, now missing its central section and divided in two, that records his first plan for the fountain. He did little or no carving before returning to Lucca to sculpt apostles for the city's cathedral, as well as an altarpiece and tomb slabs for the funerary chapel of the Trenta family. Legal troubles, however, cut short his time there. In 1413, a Lucchese merchant accused him and his assistant Giovanni da Imola of theft, rape, and sodomy. Giovanni was thrown in jail, where he remained for over 3 years, but Jacopo, perhaps through the intervention of the Sienese government, escaped, and by 1414 was back in Siena, where the Fonte Gaia project awaited him. Jacopo thus began the fountain under a cloud of suspicion. By coincidence, the sculpture adorning the 14th-century fountain he was commissioned to replace had also at one time been something of a suspect. Relatively little is known about the appearance and decoration of the earlier fountain in the Campo, a modest structure that first received water in 1343 after completion of the city's system of underground aqueducts known as bottini. A painting of the Virgin Mary, the fountain's dedicatee, adorned it, as did, eventually, an ancient statue of Venus that had been unearthed in Siena in the mid-14th century. The deliberations of the Sienese citizen councils tersely record the decision in 1357 to remove this statue because it seemed, quote, dishonorable, end quote. In a well-known passage in the commentaries, Ghiberti provides more detail about this event and the statue itself, which he claims to have seen in a drawing by Ambrogio Lorenzetti. The sculpture bore the name of Lysippus, and its sensational discovery, he says, captured the attention of the city's artists, but also of the general public, leading to its installation on the fountain. Opinion, however, turned, and according to Ghiberti, some considered the elevation and admiration of the statue as idolatrous acts that God decided to punish by inflicting adversities on the city. Ghiberti cites the speech of an unnamed Sienese citizen who suggested pulling it down, breaking it into pieces, and burying them in Florentine territory. According to Ghiberti, this was indeed done, but he writes that, quote, fu soppellita in sul nostro terreno, grammatically reassembling the pieces and implying that the ancient marble goddess was buried whole and intact in Florentine territory. Jacopo's fountain has unfortunately suffered a fate similar to the one that befell the Venus. By the 19th century, when the Fonte Gaia was removed from the Campo and replaced with a copy, weather and human contact had severely damaged the reliefs and statues that adorn the 3 low walls bordering the main pool, causing the loss of large sections of marble and obliterating almost entirely their once gilded and painted surfaces. And you see here a few flakes of gold and paint that survive, and the paint may have actually adorned gesso that was shaped on the surface of the marble. As a result, the cycle today exists as much in the imagination as in reality. Even in pristine condition during the 15th century, however, the fountain sculptures were incomplete without imaginative interventions from viewers. The reliefs and statues represent stories and figures tied thematically to the water that flowed past and pooled before them, and their full meaning emerges when beholders connect them to that water. As we shall see, Jacopo's sculptures were read in this manner in the years immediately after their installation, when the fountain inspired a series of poems that transformed it from a civic monument into a font of poetic inspiration, figuring Siena as a place where classical poetry was reborn. As a number of studies have emphasized, the initial plan, which Jacopo mapped out in the drawing, relied on long-established Sienese civic iconography and its emphasis on the city's ancient Roman origins, on virtues considered essential to proper governing and public comportment, and on the city's primary saintly patron, the Virgin Mary. Most agree that the 2 statues elevated at left and right, here, represent Acca Larentia and Rhea Silvia, the adoptive and birth mothers, respectively, of Romulus and Remus, themselves the father and uncle of Cineas and Ascius, Siena's legendary founders. In the drawing, the 4 cardinal virtues, 1 theological virtue, faith, and a personification of humility occupy the shallow niches lining the fountain's inner walls. The missing part of the drawing probably depicted the Virgin and Christ, as was the case in the finished fountain. If this initial plan had been adopted, Mary would have appeared twice, in the center and again in the right wing, where she sits across the water from the angel Gabriel, a visualization of the Annunciation separated by the basin, here occupied by she-wolves who, according to ancient and medieval sources, suckled Romulus and Remus. That's here and here. The Fountain Operae significantly altered the plan in 1415. In consultation with Francesco di Valdambrino, Jacopo's assistant at this point, and also an operaio of the fountains in Bottini, they decided to add decorations to the outside of the walls and to extend farther into the piazza the two side wings, which now decreased gradually in height and diverged instead of running parallel. At this time, the program also changed significantly. It was decided that angels should flank Mary and Christ, that all the theological and cardinal virtues, in addition to wisdom, should appear, and that the Annunciation was to be replaced by the creation of Adam and the expulsion of Adam and Eve from Eden. These two scenes Jacopo must have recognized evoke the fountain's history. In the relief as completed, God has created Adam's body out of earth, and in the facing panel, the angel forces Adam and Eve out of the Garden of Eden, pushing Adam through its gate, as can be seen clearly here and also clearly in a 15th-century copy of the relief. The paired episodes in which God excavates Adam's body and, following that, an angel expels him along with Eve, echo the episode of Siena's Lysipp and Venus, who, like Adam, was extracted from the earth and then exiled. These Old Testament scenes, although they strike a discordant note in a cycle that otherwise highlights themes and figures traditional in Sienese civic art, are not theologically incompatible with the other reliefs. Together with the virtues, Mary, and Christ, they evoke a standard tenet of Christianity, most clearly articulated by Aquinas, that humans who remain mindful of what is virtuous and act well will, despite their inherently sinful state, strive for salvation through Christ. There is, however, another element that binds together the three major components of this cycle, and that is their connection to water, which became, in Jacopo's hands, a major component of the fountain's iconography. As can be seen in several paintings, here, for example, water, once it entered the fountain, filled two receptacles: the deep pool bordered by the walls adorned with reliefs, and a secondary shallow pool, probably added to the plan after 1415, that extended into the Campo's pavement and held spill-off from the first. The water was to flow into the upper receptacle from spouts carved to resemble wolves ridden by little boys called pueri in a document of 1416. From these spouts, as well as others that took the form of riderless wolves, water flowed and splashed into the upper basin. By contrast, a thin, smooth sheet of water would have run down the surface of the second receptacle, whose walls rose, as you can see, only a few inches above the pavement. Contemporary chronicles record the celebrations that accompanied the water's arrival in the Campo in 1343, when the entire city, members of the elite and middle classes, artisans, men, women, children, clerics, and peasants, came together and rejoiced with sweets, food, wine, dancing, and singing. The emotional outpouring reveals how important this moment was in Siena, where the lack of a reliable water source in the middle of town had, before 1343, seriously stunted the city's economic growth. Although those who used the fountain needed little stimulus to focus on the water that had just arrived and that was the lifeblood of the city, certain carved figures may have manifested the element's essential qualities and thus highlighted its presence. Several putti, only one of which survives, and unfortunately without his head, held swaths of cloth attached to swags of fruit, and later descriptions record the presence of at least one other now lost putto seated atop the fountain's walls. Donatello and Jacopo created children for other sites, and Charles Dempsey has argued that these small figures represent spirits that, in ancient Greek philosophical and medical theory, occupy human bodies and trigger surges of feeling and sensation. Aristotle claims that such spirits exist even in the elements comprising bodies, including most prominently water, which bubbles and swirls as a result of their presence. For those who knew the philosophical tradition, the little children surrounding the pools, looking down into them, and perhaps even riding wolves who seemed to navigate the streaming current, embody the element splashing around them. The presence of two pools, one feeding the other, highlighted water's ability to flow, and indeed the fountain was the culmination of the so-called bottino maestro, which comprised 11 miles of tunnels that channeled water, carrying it into Siena from springs located in the Chianti Hills north of the city. This aqueduct, as the many who built and maintained it knew, differed significantly from other Sienese bottini, which collected water that dripped through the length of their porous walls and vaults. Its completion must have seemed to many a mysterious and nearly miraculous achievement. Aqueducts rely, of course, on the gradual downward flow of water, whereas the waters carried by this bottino seemed to rise or ascend into hilltop Siena. This was, in actuality, accomplished through the use of a network of graduated channels and siphons, but such a feat also has a venerable biblical precedent, one in fact visualized in Jacopo's cycle. In the second chapter of Genesis, God causes a spring to rise from the earth. And the text of the Bible says, fons ascendebat, and with the newly soft and pliable ground, he forms the first man. The waters of the Fonte Gaia, flowing past the relief of Adam and God, dramatize the biblical moment in which water rises from the depths to make an earthly substance capable of being molded and shaped, we might say sculpted. A subsequent biblical verse describes this water flowing from paradise and dividing to become 4 major rivers, and the water running past the expulsion relief would have evoked the post-Edenic history of humanity throughout the world. Jacopo figured one such moment in the statues of Acca Larentia and Rhea Silvia with Romulus and Remus. Accounts of the twins' infancy appear in Livy's History of Rome, where he describes their birth, abandonment, and rescue, in great detail in Ovid's Fasti, and in Plutarch's biography of Romulus. In Ovid's telling, Rhea Silvia, a Vestal virgin, reclines on a riverbank, opens her dress to the breeze, and, soothed by the sound of shifting willows, chirping birds, and murmuring water, falls asleep. The god Mars comes across her and, desiring her immediately, possesses her, and from this encounter are born Romulus and Remus. Their uncle Amulius, king of Alba Longa, fears that the twins will one day seek the throne and orders them drowned in the Tiber. In Livy and Plutarch, those who take a basket holding the twins to the Tiber discover that the river has overflowed its banks, rendering its quickly moving waters unreachable. The basket is consequently pushed into a placid pool, where a gentle current causes it to drift along before the twins are discovered, first by a she-wolf, and then by the shepherd Faustulus, who with his wife Acca Larentia cares for them. In the drawing of 1408, really 1409, I think, the boy in Larentia's arms reaches for her and touches her neck and shoulder. The standing brother takes her hand while gazing towards viewers placidly. In the sketch's right half, Romulus and Remus are not so securely carried and not as content. Rhea Silvia holds one son, but his left leg slips down, its toes scraping her upper thigh, and the boy beside her stands on his toes, reaching upward to grasp his mother's arm with, it seems, some urgency. Her left hand hangs down, avoiding contact with him, and the sketch seems to show 3 fingers of her right hand pulling away from the calf of the boy in her arms, as if she is letting him slip from her grasp. In the carved version of this group, she holds the child on her left flank rather than her right. His left arm is lost, but as can be seen in a drawing of circa 1500, in the sculpture he originally reached towards her with both arms, and his leg was shown hanging down. In the drawing and the sculpture, one sees the standing twin reaching up, his arm grasped by her hand. At left, the placid attitude of the standing boy was replaced in the carved version by a sense that he moves away from something. He picks up his right leg and reaches towards Acca Larentia with both hands. A drawing Jacopo probably made as he worked through initial ideas similarly contains a child who seems to flee something beneath him. Not coincidentally, I think, Ghiberti adopted a similar formulation in The Gates of Paradise, where in the scene of Moses receiving the law, an event accompanied in the Bible by a violent storm, and in some interpretations an earthquake, and these make the Israelites tremble, a woman holds in her arms a boy as another reaches up to her, seeking her reassurance. Jacopo's influence is, I think, clear. His two statues visualize, or once visualized, at left, children struggling to obtain and then enjoy Acca Laurentia's protection, and at right, a group in which one twin begins slipping from Rhea Silvia's grasp even as he reached or reaches towards her. In the context of the ancient narrative, such actions correspond to moments before and after the twins are placed in the water that appears in both the textual account and that at one time ran beside and in front of Jacopo's sculptures. On the right, viewers find the moment before Rhea Silvia relinquishes her sons. On the left, they have been rescued, although for the boy reaching for Laurentia, the threat of the water seems present and real. And it was real, for water flowed beneath and before them. That Jacopo always intended these groups to work in conjunction with the fountain's water seems clear from the initial plan, where the mother's bodies point inward toward the space to be occupied by the pool. After the decision to add the secondary receptacle, Jacopo rotated them to face the piazza, an apt decision given the presence of the shallow basin in front, where the smooth, slowly flowing water recalls the calm outer pools of the Tiber, which, so the ancient sources say, received and then relinquished the basket containing Romulus and Remus. The pairing of the sculpture and water thus vividly evokes both the Bible's account of the beginning of human history and Rome's own foundation legend. The recreation of the physical context must have seemed familiar to viewers accustomed to devotional modes posited in texts like the Meditationes Vitae Christi, which encourages readers to recreate in their minds spaces and times described in sacred history, to create, in short, visions of past places in which not only figures but also physical features of places, springs, rivers, and ponds, to pick 3 random examples, form part of the imagined experience. The most eloquent confirmation that beholders viewed Jacopo's sculptures together with the water in the pools comes from 1430, about a decade after the fountain's installation, when the poet Giovanni Marasio, Sicilian by birth but resident in Siena, described, in a poem addressed to Leonardo Bruni, a Florentine chancellor, the Fonte Gaia as a fountain of youth capable of reinvigorating those touched by its waters. But it is also, for Marasio, both a spring sacred to Venus and Cupid, who, he writes, sits on its parapet when in need of rest, and a latter-day Hippocrene, the mythic fountain praised by poets and sacred to the Muses. In fact, he unites these last 2 associations. The font's waters inspire captivating poetry because, suffused with Venus's grace, they engender strong emotion in the poet's heart. Poetry and inspiration were topics of intense interest in Siena in the 1420s, which witnessed a burst of poetic creativity. In this period, for example, the young Aeneas Silvius Piccolomini, studying at the Sienese studio, authored his first collection of Latin love poetry, the Cinthia. And between 1421 and 24, Antonio Beccadelli, a friend of Marasio, wrote his Hermaphroditus, a collection of infamously obscene poems. Marasio, enmeshed in this intellectual context, evidently could not resist casting the Fonte Gaia as Siena's own Hippocrene fountain. We have perhaps moved very far from Jacopo's original intentions, but I would like to conclude by emphasizing the potential role of his sculptures in encouraging Marasio's poetic conception. Although Marasio says that the 9 muses surround the waters of the Fonte Gaia, there is no ambiguity concerning the identity of the 9 sculpted figures facing the main pool. The virtues appear with their attributes, here faith with her cross, and wisdom with her book and lamp. And all would have understood the central panel as representing Mary and Christ. Stylistically, however, their poses, drapery, and heads, as many studies have shown, are overwhelmingly classicizing. The placement of such figures surrounding a pool of water perhaps encouraged in classically minded viewers like Marazio an interpretive slippage very common in literary sources. Dante in the Divine Comedy and Boccaccio in the Commedia delle Ninfe Fiorentine conflated the virtues and the pagan nymphs, a poetic device perhaps encouraged by the origin of the cardinal virtues in pagan philosophy. Casts and engravings confirm that Jacopo downplayed the virtues' status as Christian, for he chose not to give them wings, and not even, surprisingly, the theological virtues, who often possess wings to indicate their role in lifting the soul to salvation, as in this famous example. It is perhaps appropriate that Jacopo's sculptures, Christian figures in classical guise, inspired writers like Marazio to envision the new fountain as sacred to poets and, in particular, to Venus. 70 years before, she had met a much different fate in Siena. But Jacopo's sculptures, with their unabashed referencing of ancient forms, proved that early 15th century Sienese sculptors embraced precisely the type of statuary that some in the city had, in an earlier time, sought to destroy. Thank you.
I found really fascinating. Thank you for that. I'm wondering about coins and the images on them. So, is a simple explanation for the fact that John the Baptist on the florin is on the back of Ghiberti's doors, simply that is the baptistry, with John the Baptist's house in Florence, and so somehow by putting the image from the coin in that space, which would have faced the altar, there's some connection being made. And I'm just kind of imagining things here, but does a coin become something more than a coin when it has an image at the same time, and it's the saint of the patron saint of the city? I mean, I think of like not reliquaries, but pilgrim badges or things like that, I don't know, is something else happening here besides just materials? Can we think about these iconographically and in relation to the status of John the Baptist as the patron saint of the city?
It's a good question, and I think that certainly that would be one way to think about it in terms of the importance of that as a commission, and then the migration of that, the image of St. John the Baptist. I think that I'd be a little bit careful in working too much with that, only in that there were other essentially iron marks that were put in, so it wasn't exclusively St. John the Baptist, but certainly the idea that there is a coin, a stamp that essentially makes a coin a coin that's migrating or being put on the doors, and that it has to do with the iconographic program of St. John the Baptist. I think that certainly would work. The other proposal that's been made, and this is not mine, this is somebody at the Ufficio, one of the restorers around parties, said that effectively what's happening is that there's this essentially changeover in who the die engraver was, and so that it's actually Ghiberti who is essentially judging this competition over the iconographic program, which potentially could be the case. I'm more inclined, I think, to see this as an important mark or measure of what it means for a coin to be put in an image of St. John the Baptist on this very important commission as it were.
Having looked at those marks on the back of the Gates of Paradise, they really seem much more casual, and something happened in the shop. Some night they got in there and they started trying out these tools. There may be eventually implications, but it's not as though you get these neat markings, sealing as it were, with an image of John the Baptist. But all those odd little marks have a sense of serendipity as well as somebody taking and using an available space that we would not have normally thought you'd use to try out your coin dice.
Right, and I think that that's a wonderful point. And just to give what that is a bit more context. Those marks certainly do appear in various places, and they can be individual punch marks. And so as you saw with the dolphins, the stemma, the marker of the midmaster, essentially, that they're not cohesive. Okay, so it's not as if in rare cases there would be a coalition of the image of the body of St. John the Baptist. And so I do think that one has to be a bit careful in how that's read. I think it might go beyond serendipity, but so I think that there is something more that's there, but it's not as if these are the claims that are in our chromatic copies that are being stamped on.
If I may put in myself, I think that Doralichum, you cite in your bibliography, has actually tried to reconstruct a moment of transition within the Zecca and to see in the punzoni, in the impressions of the coins, a kind of demonstration from one side from the other of what people can do as part of this moment when someone was losing a job and someone else was going to get a job, and these were well-paid jobs.
Yeah, and then so the idea there is that it's Ghiberti who is the judge as to which iconographic program would move forward.
In connection with what Bob said, I mean, the Baptist is also the patron saint of the Calimala, which is the patron of the commission. But I agree, I mean, with Gary, that they have a randomness to them, and I think this is implicit in what's being said, that the workshop is a place where people are coming in and leaving, and anybody who's cast bronze and then attempted to chase it knows how difficult that is. You have to punch it exactly correctly. Too hard, it's too deep, too light, it's not enough, and it's hard to make it deeper if you do it too light. And I think that, I mean, there's something to be said for using the tools that were there in order to get a sense for the hardness or the softness of the bronze, or I mean, because there were so many elements being chased over so many decades. The panel drum was cast and chased very quickly, but then all of the framing elements and the frames themselves were cast later, and those were all chased by different people who came to the top of the also Gozoli. And the punchworks can be lots of different things, but I think importantly they are about practice and about getting used to the materials that evolved even within the project.
And this is a point that Amy has brought up before, but I think that it also helps to allow us to see coins as engaging or as plastic arts, really, and so that the fact that these marks are migrating over to the doors really does help to break down certain ideas about what coins are. So.
I just wanted to say, I think what we're discussing here is really interesting, and I wonder whether we have to see a distinction between serendipity and practice on one hand versus something that is more meaningful. And just because these items might be available in the workshop doesn't mean that they weren't specially chosen as opposed to other tools or other things. And so they may have a certain valence as well as being it happened to be something that was available in the workshop.
There were other hands raised. Deborah?
Yes, I have a question for Christine. Not a question, more of an observation. Thanks a lot for the immersing us into the sensuous quality of the bronze. That was very appealing and very welcome. I wanted to bring up another sort of side of this sensuality of Florentine sculpture. And as I was listening to you, I was thinking of the article that Alison Wright wrote not too long ago in Art History. Was it in Art History, Alison? On I'm sure you know, on Desiderio's tabernacle in San Lorenzo, particularly focusing on the image of Christ as the man of sorrows, or the entombment, I guess it is more the entombment of Christ. And she emphasized the softness and the low quality that Desiderio was searching for, was certainly the master of, really took it beyond anything that Donatello, took it beyond Donatello's concept of that particular technology. And emphasizing that this was made to evoke in the spectator an empathetic response to the entombment, simply because the lusciousness, the whole thing of Desiderio's luscious, the lusciousness of that soft schiacciato marble would have something of the same effect. Listening to you, I'm thinking that Verrocchio takes into bronze something that he himself, if Alison Wright is right, might have been responsive to, and then, okay, we could do this in this more malleable material. So perhaps this feeling for an empathetic response to the sensuousness of the material is something that's we should consider as part of Florence in the second half of the 15th century.
Thank you very much. In the longer version of this paper, I do talk about that and that exact connection, because I think the way that Alison talks about the relief and it's very useful for thinking about Verrocchio. Actually, I think what Desiderio is doing is completely different from what Verrocchio is doing. I would argue that what Desiderio is doing, this is what Alison says, is encouraging the viewer to move from the material world into the immaterial world. And so he's playing with the whole idea of materiality, but in a very specific way that I think is completely different from what Verrocchio is doing. I think it's what Verrocchio is doing is something really extraordinary, where he's able to emphasize the materiality of this immaterial subject. So I think that that connection is really useful, but I would see it as doing something that's completely different.
Thank you.
Yes.
On the same subject, I take exception to your treatment of the Zuccone.
Jim, would you like this?
I don't need it. I take exception to your treatment of the Zuccone. I think your pictures were pre-restoration, it seems to me. And I find it the most eloquent head imaginable, and I just don't imagine saying to it, speak, speak. I think you don't need that for your treatment of the Doubting Thomas.
I have to admit, I was trying to make a connection with the exhibition upstairs. So I do see that that may not be so strong, but nevertheless, I find that, and in looking at the sculpture upstairs, I mean, the way that the mouth is carved is extraordinary. You can see inside the mouth, you can see the teeth. But nonetheless, I think that the way that Vasari talks about Donatello's engagement with his sculpture is still useful in terms of allowing us to have some sense about how sculptors thought about the idea of animation and making as a challenge for them. You know, whether it's true or not, I don't think is actually important. It's just that this is how it was thought about at the time, and I find that interesting.
Yes.
Just for Amy, I wondered if you could say anything about the, I noticed this when I was last in Santa Maria della Scala, that the Acqua Laurentia or the Rea Silvia, I can't remember which one, is attributed to Francesco di Valdembrino.
Yeah,
versus the other one being Quercia, and I know, and that's confusing.
It's
If he was
different.
operaio of the Fonte Gaia, I mean, do you have any?
There's a document,
Understand.
it's not a document, I'm sorry, it's a later description of the fountain that I think it's from the 16th century that claims that Francesco di Valdembrino actually carved one of those figures. And the figure on the right does differ stylistically from the one on the left and from Jacopo in general, so I can see that. I didn't emphasize that so as not to make things too, or I mean, I'm not, the paper was mostly about the iconography.
I know it's
Even
off
if-
topic.
No, it's not off topic at all. I accept it as a very valid question. It's just that even if it is or was done by Francesco, who certainly had every opportunity, who's an assistant to Jacopo's at the time, but even if it was done by him, I think that the conception came out of the workshop and ultimately from Jacopo. So I think his statue captures what he wanted to put into it. And it's that idea that the children are being relinquished or slipping from her arms. It's very hard to see, I think, today, but I think that notion would have been something integrated into the original plan, even if the statue was carved by somebody else. But I appreciate the comment.
Well, he was operaio of the waterworks, so what does that mean?
Well, he wore many hats in that situation. He worked with Jacopo, who was operaio of the fountain of Bottini. He had 3 different roles. So, I mean, he did play many assistant roles. Thank you for that. It's absolutely
Further? Yes.
Just a quick question, but I enjoyed all your talks. I just wanted to ask, just came to me this notion, I know we're aware of the paragone between painting and sculpture and the kind of the discussion, a bit of a battle between it. And I know all these sculptors were guildsmen. Was there any sort of hierarchy between any of the three materials that the sculptors worked in? Stone, bronze, and wood, and how they appreciated each? Was there one that was more valued than the other, or was it just a verisimilitude? They all wanted to try their hands at all the materials.
I think basically marble and bronze were the highest, and then wood was not regarded as such a material, though there are ways that we might think about wood in John Albany has written wonderful work on with sculpture. But yes, it seems as though bronze and marble were
Yes?
I have a question.
So,
I have a question for Amy. When was the Fonte Gaia converted so that it wasn't two fountains, two bases, one of which flowed into the other?
I believe it was in the 19th century when the original was taken out and the Verrocchio copy was put in, and it was actually put in and shifted. I don't know how many meters to the left. I mean, substantial.
But it was at that time.
I believe so, yes. Because the images after that point don't include it. Everything else I've ever seen before that time does include it. That's not to say that that secondary pool worked or functioned the whole time it was there, but it was there until the fountain was moved in the second half of the 19th century. Moved and replaced, I should say.
yes?
Hi, thanks for all your talks. I wanted to maybe, if I could, return to Professor Kloss's initial question for Lauren. I wanted to just maybe propose an idea for considering, and that is maybe that there is an apotropaic strategy at play. And I say that because I think about the act of sealing and how important that can be in a apotropaic situation, and then also the fact that the punches on the doors were done in a threshold where we often see that sort of strategy being desirable, and also the use of coins and that sort of strategy as well. And then if I remember correctly, on the back of the north doors there are lions in various positions, and that also makes me think that one might make a case for an apotropaic strategy being something that may have been in play, and I wanted to see if that provoked any further thoughts.
It's a good thought, and I certainly welcome it. I mean, I think that in this case, again, one has to be very careful about perhaps over-inscribing meaning into this, and I think that, again, going back to the point that the randomness, and I just showed you a couple of examples of where those occurred, but potentially there's something that's there, but they are kind of component parts, and I think that they do carry weight, but how that's functioning, I'm not so comfortable making the atropaic kind of argument full force, I would say. That said, one has to think about coins in other circumstances that were taken out of circulation, that were fragmented, that were made into jewelry, that kind of thing. And so potentially there is a line of inquiry there, but I would want to, I suppose, tread a little bit softly on that, just because we don't, there's a lot that's unknown about why the irons migrated out of the mint, left the mint. But it's a good line of thought, I think.
If there are no further hands raised, then I will give Nathaniel Prottas the microphone, and he will not even have to give it back.
Well, thank you all so much for joining this evening. My name is Nathaniel Prottas. I'm the Director of Education here at MOBIA, for those of you I have not had the pleasure of meeting. And I just want to extend my thanks once again to all of you for joining us for such a wonderful and stimulating day. I also want to, of course, once again thank Richard and Timothy and Dan and Amy and all of our speakers for making this such a great day. And particular thanks really do go to Dan and Amy for working so very hard to make this day come to fruition, and it is certainly a testament to their commitment and sheer hard work that we had such wonderful speakers come to join us today. And I really think this was a wonderful way to inaugurate this really exceptional exhibition. This symposium, however, as a small plug for the rest of what we're doing here for the several months, is really just the beginning of a very extensive series of programs that we're offering through the museum. In addition to a lecture series of internationally renowned scholars, the first of which takes place this Thursday and will be delivered by Michael Cole of Columbia University. We have a series of seminars, courses for students and young professionals, in-gallery workshops with artists, concerts of 15th century music, after-hours dialogues focused on single works of art in the collection, and of course, the guided visits for adults and students and learners of all ages. And for those interested, there are programs at the back on the table there, so please do join us in the upcoming months as we continue to look at this exhibition and explore it and discuss together. Thank you so much for spending the day with us, and good evening.